Hi, everybody. My name's Carroll and I'm an alcoholic. And by the grace of God and the fellowship of AA, I've been given the gift of sobriety since May 10th, 1979. And for that, I am truly, truly grateful. You know, I was kind of hoping that Dick would go on and talk for another 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes anyway. I never, ever get behind a podium, but what I'm absolutely scared to death. And tonight, it's as bad or worse than ever. I truly want to thank you for inviting me. It's an absolute privilege to be here tonight. Driving over here, I was thinking that how it just seems like it was just such a short time ago that a friend of ours died, and Barbara and I were sitting around the house thinking about gee, that same thing could happen to me, and who were the 6 people that we could name that might be pallbearers. And if I remember, I think we came up with 4 names, and I sat around worried for 2 or 3 days about whether or not my head would be down or my feet would be down, because that's the way it was for me. People did not care to invite me back any place, and to be invited back here is an absolute privilege, and another one of the many, many gifts that the programs of Alcoholics Anonymous has given me. And that's what it has been for me, is gifts. Absolutely total gifts. Dick and I were talking tonight at the dinner table, and I said, you know, it is beyond my comprehension how in the world I could possibly have what little time I've got in this program, and then to talk about Dick, who's got 6 times as much as I do, is just beyond my belief. Because for me, drinking alcohol was a full-time occupation, and that's exactly what it was for me. I forsake everything else in the world for alcohol, because that was my true love. And I was true to that love from the very first day. Let me back up a little bit and tell you a little bit about my childhood, just so you'll understand where I came from. The earliest recollection that I have in my life was standing in a closet, holding on to the doorknob of the closet with my mother there in the closet with me. And as best I can figure out, I was about 2 or 3 years old. And the reason we were in the closet was because my father was standing on the outside of the closet with a butcher knife, and he had determined that he was going to kill us. And I don't know what he was mad about, but I know that today I look back on that and realize that what was going on with him was he was drinking alcohol, and he was drinking alcohol alcoholically. Whether or not he was an alcoholic or not, I can't tell you, because he never got an opportunity to find this program. Well, that was just the beginning for me, and over the next many years, many things happened in my life with my father that had to do with alcohol. Most of them were bad. Most of them were just exactly like that. So by the age of 15 or 16, I had made up my mind that I would never, ever drink alcohol under any circumstance. I was going to be a teetotaler all my life. There's no way in the world that you would ever talk me into drinking alcohol. About age 15 or 16, I had a long conversation with one of my father's drinking buddies. This is a guy that I had known to have drank with my dad for years and years. And I remember talking to Stuart, and something had happened in his life. I didn't know what, but something had happened in his life, and he didn't drink anymore. And I remember that he said something about a program called Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea at the time what that meant, but what I do remember that conversation was that he said, Carroll, you know, there's no proof, but there is a suggestion by many of the medical profession that alcoholism might be a hereditary disease. And if it is, your chances of becoming alcoholic if you drink alcohol are 5 to 1 better than for a person whose father's not alcoholic. And he said, you want to be careful, because if you were to ever decide to drink alcohol, you probably will drink just exactly like your father. You probably will end up just exactly like your father. Well, at age 15, I promise you the one thing that I didn't ever want in my life was to be like my father. When I was about 6, a major event occurred in my life. My mother decided that she had had all of my father that she could take, and my mother and father got a divorce, and I lived with my mother. But I continued to see my father, and from time to time he would pass through town, and he would usually come into town sober, be there a day or two, get drunk, and then I wouldn't see him again for another 6 or 7 months. But every time I saw him, something bad always happened. And so that's the way it was. I just knew that if you drink alcohol, bad things happen, and therefore I didn't want bad things to happen to me, so I chose that I would never ever drink alcohol. Well, that lasted real well right up until I was about 19 years old, went to college. I got to college. I went to a fraternity party one night. It was a Sadie Hawkins Day party. I always think it's interesting. Dr. Conway from Atlanta says that maybe a sign for determining whether or not someone's alcoholic is whether or not they remember their first drink. Seldom do any of us remember our first Dr. Pepper, but most of us remember our first drink of alcohol. And boy, that's true. I mean, that's absolutely true. That particular night, that Sadie Hawkins Day dance, I remember that just as clearly as can be. I cannot tell you who I had a date with. I can't tell you anything about the particular party other than I remember the punch bowl. Now, remember, the punch bowl had something purple. They called it Purple Passion. I had a drink of it, and all of a sudden, things changed for me. As a child, because my mother and father had gotten divorced, and because divorce was not a common thing at that time, I always felt different. I always felt odd and unusual. I felt unique. I had terminal uniqueness long before I ever got to this program, long before I ever got here. I truly I felt so unique because I didn't have a father. I had red hair. My first name's Carroll, and that's mostly a girl's name, so I felt totally unique. And when I got to that party and I drank that Purple Passion, my uniqueness went away. It absolutely went away. That particular night, I learned a very valuable lesson. I learned that if you drink a lot of that stuff, that you have to drive home with one eye closed. And that was very, very important lesson because I needed that lesson a lot in the years to come. After about 2 years of college, I decided that I knew all there was to know and I didn't need any more education at all, and so I joined the Air Force. And the next 3 or 4 years, there were little incidences that occurred in my life that had to do with alcohol, and at the time I would never ever have told you that they had anything to do with it whatsoever. Like, for instance, while in the Air Force, they sent me to technical school, and one of the things that I had always been able to do very well was go through school and make good grades. It had just been an easy thing for me, and they sent me to technical school, and all of a sudden I flunked, and that had never happened to me in my life, and I didn't know what was going on, and I certainly wasn't about to talk about it being alcohol because I was having too much fun with alcohol. It just couldn't possibly be alcohol. Well, the 4 years that I was in the service, I was lucky. I never seemed to get in a whole lot of trouble. Somehow or another, I really think more than anything else was the fact that I chose friends well, and most of the friends I chose were people that would bail me out of trouble before I would get in too deep. And that happened a lot. My friends would end up taking me home, or they would end up covering for me, or they would end up doing any one of 1,000 of the enabling kind of things that happened. Just as I was getting ready to get out of the service, I met and married a young girl from Colorado that had been raised on a farm and knew absolutely nothing about big city living, and I grabbed her up and hustled her off to Springfield, Illinois. And as I got to Springfield, Illinois, went to work for a company there. In the first day on the job, my new boss called me at noontime and said, "Let's go to lunch." And being a dutiful young new employee, I followed him right out the door to lunch. And the next thing I knew, we were sitting in a bar, and we sat down, and he ordered a martini. And I looked at that, and it looked so pretty in that little tall stemmed glass, and so I ordered a martini. Sounded like the thing to do. And what happened was I found a new kind of purple passion. I absolutely did. I got back from lunch about 2 o'clock that afternoon with the boss, and I sat and I pondered what had transpired my very first day on the job, and I said, I bet I've got the very best job in the whole world. I've got a boss that goes out to lunch, has martinis. I've got to have the best job in the whole world. So for the next 2 years, every day, we went out to lunch together. Every day we did the same thing. We went in, the first thing we did was order our martinis. We sat there and drank our martinis. We get back from lunch about 2 in the afternoon. And I'm not real sure what we did in the afternoon, but we told them we worked. After about 2 years of that, I had the opportunity to transfer to a job in St. Louis, and I bundled up my wife and child, and off we went to St. Louis. And we got to St. Louis, and I went in and reported to work for this company, and my new boss about noontime came and said, "Carroll, come on, let's go to lunch." Well, it sounds like a good thing to do, I'm a new employee, I better do what the boss says do. And we took off and we went to lunch. And we went to lunch about 11 o'clock. And we got to the bar, and we sat down, and he ordered a scotch, and I said, "That looks like a good thing to do," so I ordered a scotch. And I got back about 2 o'clock after lunch, sat down, I pondered, and I said, that other job was good, but this one's better because the boss paid for lunch. So for the next 6 years, the same thing happened. Every day, Tom and I would climb in a car, go to lunch, and we'd get back from lunch about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, I tell you this because later I want you to understand that I have created a long history of long lunches. During that next 6 years, 1,000 things happened, many of the same kind of stories that I'm sure you are all familiar with. One of the things that happened for me is my ego continued to build, my disease continued to get worse, and I began to believe all of the lies that I had been telling for so long. And so when it came time for a promotion, raise time with our company, I went to this friend who was also my boss, and I said, "Tom, I don't care how much money you give me and raise this time, I want a promotion. And if you won't give me a promotion, then I'll just quit your company and I'll go back to school and get my degree." Well, we had just had our second child, and that was a lot of big talk for somebody that had not saved any money. And funny thing about what happened, Tom, who truly was a tremendous friend and still is today, a great friend of mine, did what I thought was the dirtiest thing that ever happened. He gave me the biggest raise I'd ever had in my life and did not give me the promotion. And I was stuck. I had to do exactly what I said I was going to do, because one of the things that I had always lived by was whatever your decision is, that's it, baby. You got to live with that. And so I quit the job, packed up my wife, 2 kids, and off to school I went. For the next 2 years, my wife supported me as I went to school and got my degree. And throughout that time, I didn't have any trouble going to school or making grades in school, but I had trouble getting to class, particularly those classes that would start at 11 in the morning or that would start at 1 in the afternoon. And I had a tough time. I had an absolute tough time there. After graduating from college, I went to work for a major company in Dallas, Texas called Texas Instruments. And let me explain how I went to work there. I went to work with a chest so puffed up that it was unbelievable, because I had done this major accomplishment. I had gone to college and gotten a degree while having a wife and 2 kids. And I was absolutely convinced that I was God's gift to that company. Absolutely convinced of it. First day at work at Texas Instruments, my new employer, about 11:30, came by and said, "Come on, Carroll, let's go to lunch." Sure enough, I had a miraculous ability to be able to pick out bosses. Oh, me. So for the next 10 years, same thing happened. However, you can't drink like that, or I couldn't drink like that for a 10-year time period, plus all the years before that, without my disease continuing to get worse and worse. And my disease did get worse and worse. And what happened for me was I reached that point that I could no longer be away from alcohol more than 2 hours at a time. So what that meant for me was that when I got up in the morning, I could not make it to work until about 9:30 or 10. I would leave work at my regular 11 o'clock hour to go to lunch. I would get back from lunch about 2 in the afternoon, and I would leave at 4 in the afternoon. Well, needless to say, I probably didn't get very much work done whatsoever. And it didn't take very long for my newer boss to call me into the office one day and said, "Carroll, we've had all of you we can take. You've just had it here. We can't take any more of it." At that point, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt what was going on in my life and what had happened. It had been about 6 months before that particular date that I had walked out to the car one morning to go to work. And I remember reaching for the doorknob, and I remember thinking, God, I wish there was a way that I could just get back up to the level that my father had been. Because I knew I had gone way beyond that. And I remember thinking, there is absolutely no way in the world that I'll ever live another day of my life without drinking alcohol. It can't be done. I tried everything I knew, every possible thing that I knew, and there was no way that I was going to live without alcohol. About 2 years before that particular date, another major incident had occurred in my life. That little girl from Colorado had come to me and said, "Carroll, I've had all of you I can take, and I'm moving out." One of the many gifts that I've been given in my life was an exceptionally important gift to me that day, because on that particular day, those 2 boys that I talked about came to me and to their mother, and they said, "Mother, we want you to move out. We want you to go get an apartment. We want to stay in the house, and we want to stay with Dad." And what a marvelous gift I was given there, and didn't even know it. Between that time and the 2 years later, when my boss said that he had had all of me he could take, a lot of things happened, and most of which I'm not particularly proud of, but they're part of my life, and that's just the way it is. On that particular Thursday, May 10th, 1979, when Gene had called me into the office and said, "Carroll, we've had all of you we can take. We want your resignation," I did the only thing that any good alcoholic knew to do. I went home and fixed myself a drink. But something different happened. Something happened that day. Because as I started to drink that drink, I somehow knew that my answer was not in that drink. And I remember walking to the kitchen. I remember pouring that drink down the sink. And I did something that was so unusual that it was hard for me to believe that I was even doing it. And what I did was walk back to the bedroom and prayed a prayer so common for so many people here. And that prayer was just, I give up, God. I'm willing to do it your way from now on. I had been very lucky. I'd been very fortunate because one of the things that had happened during my working there with TI is one of my best friends, who was also my drinking buddy about 9 months previous to this, had been stopped in the parking lot early in the morning because he was drunk, and the security department called me and said, Carroll, you got to go do something with David because he's out in the parking lot and he's drunk, and we can't do anything with him, and he can't come in the plant. And so I went to the parking lot to get this friend of mine, and I've forgotten, I think I sat him down in the car, but the important thing is that I did not know what I could do with David at the time. I knew that David had a terrible drinking problem. I mean, he was a bad drunk. And he would, when he and his wife would break up, he'd come over and stay with me and the boys, and I'd see him get up in the morning and drink half my dang vodka before I could get to it. And he had a terrible drinking problem. And I looked in the Yellow Pages that particular morning, and the first name listed under alcoholism was a place called Brookhaven Hospital, and I called that hospital, and I got David into that hospital because, as I say, I mean, I could tell right away that he is bad drunk. He needed treatment. He needed help bad. And so I had the opportunity to help David get into the hospital. At the time, I just knew he needed help. So on that particular morning in May, when Gene had said that they had all of me that they could take, and after that prayer, I sat down and I wrote out this resignation that the company had asked for, and I went in the next morning with resignation in hand, and I said, Gene, I have one request. And he said, what's that? And I said, could you hold my resignation until such time as I can go to that Brookhaven Hospital? And we went through a long story about that, spent several hours discussing that, and what ended up is he said yes, that he had worked that out so that I could do that, and that they would process my resignation right after I got out of the hospital. So I went home, and I did the next best thing that a good drunk would do. I called Brookhaven Hospital up on telephone, and I talked to this little lady, and I said, say, I think I'm a little bit alcoholic. Do you have a program that I can come in like one night a week and do something about? Well, I'm so grateful that it didn't work that way, and she didn't allow me to do that. She insisted that I go to the hospital, and I did go into the hospital. And while in the hospital was where I was introduced to this beautiful program. Because while sitting in the hospital, and I wish that I had someday I'm going to get a picture of this psychiatrist, and I'm not good at word pictures, but the best thing I can tell you about him is that he has eyebrows that come out to here. And I'm sitting across the table looking at this guy, and he says, Carroll, you know, you got about a 50% chance to live, and all of it's in Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, I can guarantee you, I was not impressed, and besides, I was absolutely sure I wasn't that bad. I just wasn't that bad. But I did. I followed his advice, and I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the first meeting that I went to, I remember sitting at the meeting, and I remember looking at the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And I remember sitting there thinking, and out of a sheer fogginess that I was in, I remember sitting there thinking, you know, if I can just figure out the one of those that is the key to all this, I'll be able to just get that one, and that'll be it, and everything will be fine. And my keen mind looked down the 24 different propositions that were there, and I picked the shortest one because that was the only one I could comprehend. And what it said was the only requirement for AA membership is the desire to stop drinking. How little did I know how very, very important that one tradition was. The next 2 or 3 meetings that I went to of Alcoholics Anonymous, I absolutely fell in love with the people that were there. And the reason I fell in love with the people that were there was because I felt at home. I felt wanted. I felt loved. I felt needed. And I could not understand that. Let me tell you, I couldn't love me. I didn't feel like I was needed in any sense of the word. I'd just been fired from my job. There was just nothing about me that I liked. And I could not understand how in the world you could like me, how you could love me, how you could accept me, because I was unacceptable. But you accepted me anyway. And I felt so loved and so warm and so at home. And I just knew that somehow or another I had found the place where I was not unique, that I had found the place that I was truly, truly at home. A lot of things happened that first few months for me, and each and every one of those is so very, very important to me, because each and every one of those were gifts that were given to me. I remember I guess one of the very first things I heard is that I had to be able to follow directions. And I wanted what you had so badly. I was willing to do anything that you told me to do. There was just nothing. There was absolutely nothing in my mind that I wouldn't do. So when they said make 90 meetings in 90 days, I got myself a calendar and I began to mark it. And every meeting I went to, each day I would mark the calendar so that I would make sure that I made 90 meetings in 90 days. They told me to get myself a sponsor. I got myself a sponsor. They told me to share my life with my sponsor. The first thing I did with my sponsor is call him up on the telephone and say, hey, my 2 kids are playing in the junior high school play. Will you come go with me and go to the play? And he did. And he brought his wife, and we went to the play together. It's just, whatever I was told to do, that's what I tried to do. There were so many people that were so important to me early in my sobriety that I absolutely had no idea what an impact they would have on my life. I remember sitting in a meeting one day at noontime, and I remember this meeting so very clearly because there were 18 men sitting in that meeting. And as we went around the table, 17 men sat in that meeting and talked about having had a slip. And I was the 18th. So when the meeting was over with, I grabbed one of those guys, one that I had already found some respect for, and I grabbed him and I said, Richard, come go with me. And he said, where are we going? And I said, I want to go to the bar. And he said, why? And I said, because I want to have my slip. I was willing to go to any lengths. The next day, I went back to that same group. And before the meeting, I was sitting there talking with one of the men that had already had a major impression on me and had already said enough to me that I knew that this man loved me and cared for me. But this particular day, he sat there, and if I could possibly try to explain what this guy looked like, the best I can come to explaining it is if you know what Santa Claus looked like when you were about 5 years old, and if you took his beard away, but all of the rest of his face was there, and his twinkling eyes, and his shiny little nose, well, that's what this guy looked like to me. And he sat there across the table from me that day and he said, Carroll, you don't ever have to go back if you don't want to. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that that man had said the most loving thing to me that's ever been said in my life. Absolutely the most loving thing that anyone had ever said to me in my entire life. Because the one thing I did not want to do was go back to where I'd been. I somehow or another knew that what I had lived in had been hell. And I knew that I didn't want to live in that hell anymore. That man is, those words to me today are still the most important words, the most loving words that anyone's ever said to me. Absolutely the most loving words. In the next 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, however many it was, a lot of things happened. One of the things was that first sponsor came to me and said, well, Carroll, you're going to have to find yourself another sponsor because I'm moving to Baltimore, Maryland. And I was devastated. I mean, I hadn't even gotten to know this guy real well other than to take him to this play. But I was just devastated, absolutely devastated. Let me back up just a minute because there's 2 important things, and I always forget to tell this, and I'm going to get them out tonight. Just as I was getting ready to leave the hospital, the little social worker in the hospital called Barbara and my 2 boys in for a family meeting. And as we sat and we had this family meeting and we talked about what I needed to do to maintain my sobriety, my 2 boys looked at me, and these are the boys that had been to their mother just a few short years before and told their mother that they wanted her to move out. And these 2 boys looked at me and said, Dad, we don't care what you do. We don't care whether you get sober or whether you stay drunk, or we just don't care. Because we've had all of you we can take. And we've decided we're going to move out. We just don't care. I had been to just enough meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous, just enough to be able to look at those boys and say, guys, you've got to do what you've got to do. But what I've got to do is go to Alcoholics Anonymous and try to stay sober today, because that's all I can do. That's the best I can do. I know that I owe you an amends, but I know that that's one of the steps further down in the program, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But right now, the only thing I can do is just try to go to AA and stay sober. Well, the boys decided that they would go spend the summer with their mother, and at the end of summer they'd come back and we would talk about it. We might negotiate something, and I said that was fine. I went back to that place of employment to pick up my last paycheck, and they surprised me because I walked in the door and they said, where would you like to go to work? And I thought, it's none of your business where I go to work. And they said, no, Carroll, you don't understand. Where would you like to go to work in the company? Because you can go to work any place you want to. Another gift, another absolute gift, because I promise you I had never done anything with that company to earn that. Went back to work for the company and continued to go to AA, and I had the arrogance when I went back to work for the company. Now I've been fired from the job. I come back, they tell me that I can go to work where I want to, and I say, well, all right, fine. I'll come back to work for your company, but understand this: I'm going to leave at 11:30 every day for lunch, and I'll get back as close to 1:30 as I can. But I will not be going to a bar. I'll be going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they said, okay. They said, okay. And so that's what I did for the next 3 or 4 months. It was every day. I would leave at 11:30. I would go to a noon meeting. I would get back from the noon meeting about 1:30 in the afternoon. And finally one day, I got a phone call, and a guy named Gene, the guy that had called me into his office just a few short months before and said, Carroll, we've had all you we can take. He called me and said, Carroll, would you come down and do a special project for me? I need you for about 3 weeks. And I said, yes. And I went to do that special project, and I stayed with that man for the next 6 years. And I had an absolutely marvelous relationship with that man. Every year on my AA anniversary, I take him to lunch and tell him thank you for firing me. He never has exactly understood that, but he's beginning to have second thoughts about that. About a year ago, he called me in the office one day and he said, tell me about this AA program you go to. And we had a long talk about it. He decided that after my conversation with him, and I did exactly what the big book told me to do. I just told him my story. And he decided that inasmuch as he gets to work considerably before 9 o'clock in the morning, and he does not stay at lunch for 3 hours every day, and he doesn't necessarily go home at 4 every day, that he couldn't possibly really have a problem with alcohol, so he's chosen not to come into the program. But that's okay. That's okay. It isn't up to me to decide whether he is or isn't alcoholic. The fact that he has asked me is good enough, and if I can pass it on to him, whatever I can pass on is okay. Let's see now, where was I when I backed up to that, talk about that? Boy, I'm getting confused. Why didn't you talk longer, Dick? So I was, my sponsor leaves to go to Baltimore, Maryland, and I have to find myself a new sponsor. Well, one of the things that happened, Barbara and I had decided to attend a new group for us. The group been around a long time. We decided to start going to a new group that was closer to the house because it was during the gasoline problem, and so we started going to this new group, and we were sitting in a discussion meeting one night, and I remember there were three men sitting across the way in this particular meeting. One of them was in flight from the FBI because one of the local banks had just been embezzled of nearly $1 million, and they were after him. One of them, the police were looking for because he had attempted to murder his wife. And this third guy over there sat there and talked about having embezzled $2.5 million from the bank. And I sized up the three of them, decided the one with $2.5 million had to be a lot better off than the other two, so I asked him to be my sponsor. And what a marvelous relationship I had there. I didn't realize at the time I asked him about that this man had been in the program for about 4 years, and that this man had begun to work the steps, and he had already made his amends with respect to that $2.5 million. And the very first thing he said to me was, well, okay, what step are you on? And I said, well, I'm about ready to start the fourth. He said, it's about time you do it. And I said, well, I don't want to rush into anything. And we spent the next year talking back and forth like that. I kept saying, I don't want to rush into anything. And we, piece by piece, little by little, we worked through that. Things that I promised I would never tell a soul, I hung on to and did not tell him. And it wasn't until the relationship with him kind of broke up and I began to feel pain, and I found it necessary to go work through those other things, those things that I was determined never to tell him or anyone else. And I found a marvelous Al-Anon that I was able to sit down with and share all of my life. And what a thrill. And I say that, what a thrill. Let me explain why. You see, when I sat and did my fifth step with her, absolutely nothing happened. There was no bolt of lightning. There was nothing great. It wasn't for a year that anything happened for me. And what happened for me a year later was a young man came into my life and he asked me if I would sponsor him. And he did the same thing that so many do. He came to me and said, "Carroll, I would like to take my fifth step with you." And so we sat down one night and he took his fifth step and I began to share my life with him. And what I began to realize was, for me, that having had the opportunity to do a fourth and fifth step brought back for me the memory of all the things that had happened in my life, such that I was able to share those with the guy that I was sponsoring. And as the two of us sat there and shared our lives with each other, I began to realize what the promises were talking about when the promises say that we will not shut the door on the past. Because I know today, for me, that's what it's all about. What I've done, I've done. What I've lived through, what I've lived through. And if whatever my experience is can be of help to anyone, then it's been worth it for me. It's been worth it for me. And what a gift. Another one of the many gifts. I talk about gifts a lot because that's exactly what I think the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is. I think Alcoholics Anonymous is a gift that has been given to each and every one of us. The thought, the idea of one old drunk looking up another one just so that he could stay sober, in and of itself sounds so strange. Strange for me, and understand I'm still just a baby in this program. I mean, when I looked up a drunk, I didn't look him up to go not drink with him. I looked him up to go drink with him. And here Bill looked up Dr. Bob just so that Bill could stay sober. He passed it on just so that he could stay sober. What a marvelous gift. A gift that's been given to each and every one of us. If we can pass it on. If we can just pass it on. Norm A. says in his talk that his sponsor said to him that it was a gift given to you, you didn't pay for it, and you can't collect for it. And the only way you can keep it is to give it away. And I know that's exactly true for me today. The only way I can keep it today is to give it away. You know, I don't know what I have to give away, but whatever it is, I sure want to give it. I absolutely want to give it. It's such a short distance from that day that I asked Richard if he would go with me to the bar so that I could have my slip to where I am today. Such an absolute short distance. I can still remember how desperately I wanted to be a part of you. I can remember how desperately I was scared to death that if you knew me, if you knew anything about me, that you'd kick me out. You wouldn't let me stay. And I can remember how you wrapped your arms around me. And I love Albert M. from Dallas, who every time I see him, he gives me an old Bob White bear hug. And I just love it. I just love it because I know I'm right where I need to be. Right where I need to be. I'm going to run out of talk before the time runs out. And I guess that's okay too. But before I sit down, there's one thing that I would like to say. Because maybe there is someone new out there. I guess this is probably about the season for the light beer and wine folks to start coming in. If there's someone new out there tonight, if there's someone that's just been here for a short time, if there's someone that's been out and is coming back, I want to say to you what that man with the Santa Claus face said to me. You don't ever have to go back if you don't want to. And I truly, truly thank you for that. Thank you.